Well, we hear a lot about phishing, but what about vishing? Lance Whitney here to talk to me a little bit more about this. And Lance, a new advisory out from the FBI talking about voice phishing attacks. What do they have to say?
Right. So this was an advisory that came out from the FBI earlier in January, Karen, and they spoke about a rise in phishing attacks or voice phishing attacks directed toward organizations and employees. And what we mean by a voice phishing or vishing attack is that the cyber criminal or the scammer will actually talk to an employee via a phone call, usually via some kind of VoIP call through a virtual meeting software. And they will somehow convince the employee to, let's say, sign in to a fraudulent login page. And once they've done that, then of course they have the employee's credentials. And the trick here is that the scammers will speak with the employees, and once they're able to gain the person's username and password, now they have open access into the network, and they also, in many cases, will use that account to trick other employees. So they will use the stolen credentials to send out phishing emails and scams to other employees within the organizations to further gain access. And then once they have all these accounts, then obviously they can dig even further into the network and cause even more damage.
And that's pretty scary because, as we know, Lance, there's no end to the damage that they can cause in a strife for so many people and companies. Any specific examples or cases here that the FBI listed?
Sure, Karen. So the FBI spoke about one case here where the criminals used what they call a chat room message service. And through that, they were able to gain access to the company's actual chat room. And they found an unsuspecting employee, and somehow they were able to convince them to sign into a phony VPN login page. And then, of course, the attackers were able to obtain the employee's VPN account credentials, and from there they were able to gain access to other employee accounts. And it turns out that the ultimate goal, according to the FBI here, was that the criminals wanted to find accounts of people who had access to a cloud-based payroll service. So obviously, as usual, there was some kind of gain, financial goal involved here by compromising the accounts of all of these different employees.
Okay, so Lance, with all of that to be said now, any recommendations that they've passed on here?
Sure. So the FBI had five specific tips that organizations should keep in mind when they're dealing with phishing attacks or vishing attacks, whichever the case may be. The first one that they have here is to set up multi-factor authentication. As I've said before, MFA is not a panacea. It's not a cure-all, because there are ways that savvy cyber criminals can still find their way past it. But it's always a good recommendation, and always at least a starting point for good security. Um, Another one that the FBI had here is to give network access to new employees on a what they call a least privilege scale or least privilege factor. And that means that you want to give new employees only a limited number of access to network resources, only as much as as it would be required for them to do their jobs. The idea being that if you start out with a minimum level of access, it's easier to ramp up from there. If and when the employee does need greater access, it's a lot easier to do that than to give them access to everything and then have to scale back because of security issues. A third tip that they had here was to make sure that you're scanning and monitoring for any unusual or suspicious behavior, because that could certainly be a sign of criminal activity. A fourth tip that they had here was to divide your network into segments. So instead of having one large network that becomes difficult to manage and administer, you can segment your network, and then each segment would have its own administrator or administrative team that would be responsible for, just for that one portion. So you're kind of allocating the responsibility that way. And then the fifth tip here that I thought was interesting, it says give administrators two separate accounts. So typically a network administrator might have just one account that they use both for managing and administering the network, but also for doing their work as a regular employee. And that can sometimes lead to trouble. So this idea of giving them two separate accounts, one account would have the necessary privileges that they would need to fully administer and manage the network. The second account would be just a regular user account that would have minimal privileges, just enough for them to do their regular jobs as an employee. So I thought that was that's definitely worth considering.
Yeah, most definitely. And some great information there, Lance, to pass on and to consider companies of all sizes. Thanks for being with me here today. Of course, much more on cybersecurity and what you need to know is all on Tech Republic. Thanks for watching.